Welcome. In this episode, I have the privilege of interviewing Mathew Burch. Mathew is a 14-year Air Force veteran. He served in a number of capacities in the Air Force, but one that we really hone in on in this discussion is his role as a UAV sensor operator. And for those unfamiliar with the term, you're going to learn a little bit about it if you watch and listen to this discussion. Myself, as a ground pounder in the Marines, was unaware what that meant, but it actually is the guy who's operating the cameras on the drones downrange. Really interesting stories from that part of his career, from that part of his journey. This ended up becoming a two-part discussion. I highly recommend you watch the whole thing. Stand by for part two at the end. We do our best to plant the flag at a meaningful place. We cover things like transitioning out of the military, the challenges UAV sensor operators and other similar jobs face on a daily basis, going from a base where they're operating these drones to their home just a few hours later. It's a pretty enlightening and eye-opening story. We cover some of Mathew's childhood and also start to discuss a bit of what he does now that he's out as a government contractor and focusing on the construction space, but also spinning up his own government contracting entity and some of the challenges associated with that, some of the ambition and vision he has in that field. So without further ado, I give you Mathew Burch. And we are live. Mathew, welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining me today.
Absolutely. I'm happy to be here.
Happy you're here, man. In our initial discussion, I was struck by the wisdom and the level of insight you delivered in such a short period of time. And I think it's indicative of your experience as a leader. You spent over 2 decades in the Air Force.
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine had something to do with it.
It had a lot to do with it. Personal and professional development kind of married together.
Yeah, I can imagine that. You're doing some really interesting and impactful work these days. We got a little bit of a chance to explore that in our first discussion. I think the theme for our conversation today is where you're coming from, what your origin story is, and what's brought you to the place you're at now. Your perspective on business, leadership, life, the principles you use to make decisions, and the lessons you've learned along the way that have given you knowledge and insight that you wish you had years back when you were just starting off in your career.
Absolutely.
So to kick us off in that direction, I would ask a pretty big question that you can take any direction you'd like, which is, where did it all begin for you?
It began in the state of Michigan. I was born in northern Michigan, a town called Mount Pleasant, and I was raised in a town called Everett. It's famous for one of the national dulcimer festival goings on that happens. If you know what a dulcimer is, it's a stringed instrument you play like a xylophone. I particularly hate that music. I hate that instrument, and I hate everything that surrounds the dulcimer because of my upbringing around it. It was one of the biggest events in my hometown, and we have the county fairground in our hometown. So once a year, there was a very folksy group of people that came to our town. And also, we have the most dangerous river in northern Michigan, the Muskegon River, that actually runs through my town. Kills about 10 people a year in the state of Michigan and Osceola County, where I'm from. It's probably more specifically a year. It's a very dangerous river. They don't really talk about that. That's not in the sales brochure, but it's a really dangerous river, and it's usually about 100 yards wide, depending on where you're at on the river. And my life was also kind of surrounded that river a lot. I fished it. I went tubing on it. I've done canoe trips down there. Currently, I have an uncle that has, I don't know, something like 400 feet of riverbank that he lives on. He lives and dies by that river. He loves it. So,
Cool.
but my hometown of Everett is there used to be a lot of industry there in the early 1900s, rolling in past post World War II, and then the big automotive boom that came post World War II, the industrial revolution that kind of took over for World War II, and then continued on, and with the manufacturing jobs that we had in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and then when NAFTA was signed by George H.W. Bush and enacted under Clinton, it killed the entire state of Michigan. Well, that just happened to coincide with me graduating high school. So NAFTA was signed under George Bush, and at some point, I think 92 or 93, maybe even 94, it kicked in and it started to destroy the manufacturing base of Michigan and pretty much the Midwest, and all the automotive jobs, those dynasty jobs that you get out of high school and you go work for Ford or GM, all those jobs were gone. They weren't hiring, and you couldn't go there and have that 30-year career and have a great GM retirement or a great Chrysler retirement anymore. All that stuff kind of left. So as that was happening, I was getting into about the 10th grade. You kind of see the Titanic trying to steer around the iceberg, and our teachers were actually talking about the fact that we had a Textron plant in our hometown, and it was either they had a contractor produce something or it was shuttered up and everyone was laid off. And it was mostly about a 2 to 3 month run of something. Everyone's laid off. 2 to 3 months, everyone's laid off. It wasn't anything you could actually sink your teeth into for a career if you wanted a manufacturing job. So in the 11th grade, I went into a program in high school called Building Trades, where you learn how to go be a carpenter and learn how to build a house. And so half your day is building a house and the other half of your day is normal classes. And I did that. And that's where I learned to be a carpenter. And that's where I really got into construction. And then, of course, as the domino effect started with NAFTA killing the Midwest, all the high paying jobs went away. So everything that those high paying jobs paid for went away. So the housing market suffered. No one was building homes. No one was remodeling. No one was really doing anything. So what's a carpenter do that can't swing a hammer? He joins the United States Air Force because it was the next best option. I didn't have money for college. My parents, I came from a lower class, poor family. We weren't middle class at all by any means. So I had a very, very, very humble beginning. And when it came time for me to get out into the world, all the things that were expected to be there just weren't. So I joined the Air Force, and I left and shipped to basic training in April of 96. And I retired in December of 2019. So that's kind of how I went from carpenter to aircraft mechanic to medical administrator to I'll use the word that everyone likes to use. I was a sensor operator on the MQ-9 drone. It's actually an unmanned air vehicle, but it's I operated the camera systems and I guided the weapons on the MQ-9 Reaper. That was what I did for the last 8 years.
Wow.
So my career, I tried to have a career as a carpenter, joined the Air Force. I told them, hey, don't you have carpenters? They said, yeah, but we don't need them. We need mechanics. I said, well, I don't want to be a mechanic. And they said, there's the door. I said, where do I sign up to be a mechanic? Obviously, I wasn't going to turn that down. You were in the Marine Corps. You kind of know how that goes. They give you the job they think you're the best suited for. And most of the time, that's whatever they need the most.
Mm-hmm.
And somehow it all works out, through the ASVAB testing to get you figure out where your best skill set is. On the mechanical portion of the ASVAB, I had a 98. So I was overly qualified for that and not for an admin job or anything else. And they needed aircraft mechanics. So that was the first 10 years of my career. I was an aircraft mechanic. I worked heavy airlift aircraft. I only ever really worked special mission airlift in the Air Force. So there's like fleet aircraft like the KC-135 or the C-17 or some of the transport jets, but then they'll take like a C-130 and they'll turn it into an MC-130, which is a special operations capable. So what happened was I kept getting stuck. When I left the school in Texas, they sent me to Scott Air Force Base, and I worked it's called a white jet assignment. The plane's actually painted white. So what it is you end up getting into special mission aviation, and then they keep you there because a lot of those special mission aviation mission sets specific have very specialized equipment. The airplanes are very different than the normal fleet aircraft. Even if they're the same, even if it's a C-130, it's still going to have different systems or different motors. So I went from the DC-9, which was adapted from the normal airline in the 60s, and they brought that into the Air Force. I worked that for a while. I went over to special operations and worked MC-130s. And then I went over to Okinawa and I worked on some KC-135s, but mostly I worked like RC-135s, AWACS, and I worked some other the E8, which is a different 707 platform, the E4B, the big 747 airborne command post. I worked that airplane as well. So they pigeonhole you in that regard. And they know that you're good at flight control, landing gear specific work, and that's a specialty in the Air Force. If you're a crew chief like I was a crew chief, and you can go work and you can do pre-flights and refuels and tire changes, or you can go do they call it the aero repair shop, AR shop, and I worked flight control and landing gear specific problems. I didn't work the regular line. So, and then I guess I'll just keep continuing on. My father got sick, and the Air Force grants humanitarian assignments. I'm sure the Marines have something similar. The Navy. You basically apply and say my parent is in this medical condition, and they determine whether you can be stationed closer to them. Typically, they don't have every job at every Air Force base. They didn't have my job at Wright-Patterson, and there's this little box you can click that says, "Are you willing to retrain to take this assignment?" I said yes. They made me a medical administrator, and I went from a flight line where it was 16 hours a day a lot of times to a giant hospital, and they said, yeah, just come on in around 8 o'clock and leave around 3, and have some warm coffee, and it was a totally different life. um, I did that for 6 years and I really got tired of it. It's a very I'm not much for administration or an office job. I don't really care for it. I never have. It has to be exciting. And then, so right around the 15-year mark, when I was in the Air Force at MacDill, I applied to retrain again, and I wanted an aircrew job. And so I filled out my 5 best choices: aerial gunner, flight engineer, aero refueling. There was some other random one. And then the last one, the 5th one, was MQ-9 sensor operator, or UAV sensor operator. And as I was going through the processes, my name got racked and stacked. All the choices kept getting filled and filled and filled. So I got a call and they said, "Hey, the only thing we have left is this MQ-9 sensor operator gig. It's a really good gig. It comes with a high clearance. It's a good job. It's in demand. They're not going to get rid of it tomorrow. You'll be able to do it for a while, but it's up to you to take it if you want it." And then I said, "Yeah, I'll take it. Whatever. I'll give it a whirl." And ended up doing that for the last 8 or 9 years that I was in the Air Force. So solve
What was
some.
that like?
A lot of people have this. They have this assumption that I'm playing a video game, and I would like to spend a little time on this if I can, because that way
Sure.
maybe I could give some people some insight on what it's like to be a UAV sensor operator in the world of drones, and what the reason why it's so popular with combatant commanders, and why it is not specifically a video game. So what your day to day, you're going to have by the time I was there, I was in E6 putting on E7. So I was already in a leadership position. So I had leadership. I had to write annual, I had to write reports. I had to write, annual enlisted evaluations. I had to monitor training. I had to do all those admin leadership things, but I also had to fly. I was, I was combat mission ready aircrew, and I was expected to fly. I flew on average about 4 hours a day. Of my 8 hour shift as expected, I flew about half of it. And I really worked really hard to make sure the admin portion never kept me from flying, because I'm the type of person that I'm not going to ask anybody to do anything that I'm unwilling or unable to do myself. And if I lead from the front, you don't have an excuse
Mhm.
not to do something. And that, I'm not saying that I'm somehow enlisted aircrew Jesus, and I walked on water, and no, I had days that I was tired, and I've had days that I didn't have a great day, and I had more admin than I could fly and things like that. But for the most part, I tried to be leading a person who led from the front. And so you go in and you check in at our operations desk, and we go and we get into the ground control station, and you they do a fence check, and you basically you fence into the airplane. So it's the fence is an acronym. I don't want to discuss too much of that because it's very classified and the systems are classified, but you fence in. Basically, you go around your screen and you go around the controls. You make sure you know the parameters of the aircraft, fuel load, destination, time on target, time on station, what you're looking for. You get an operations brief, then you get a crew brief, and then you get a swap out brief with the sensor that was sitting in the seat. Get yourself situated, know what you're doing. You've got tactical readouts all around you. You've got a moving map above your head. So there's a lot of stuff going on. You get yourself oriented. You start, if you're actively looking for something, you're just take over where the last guy left off, and you start looking for the guy with white traditional clothing and a dark vest with a red hat or whatever it is that day. Or you're looking for a white Toyota Corolla station wagon out of all the other white Toyota Corolla station wagons that are in the Middle East. Looking for a four-door truck with three people in it. Well, there's like 10 million Toyota trucks in the Middle East, so good luck. But anyway, so you're looking for what you're looking for, and sometimes you get lucky and you find exactly who you're looking for, because in our mission set specifically, we were hunting. We were not doing a whole lot of intelligence gathering unless the intelligence gathering led directly to execution of a target. So we went out specific target sets. We had target decks. We had a list of people we were looking for. We had a list of intel on them. We had full target decks with color pictures of them and their face. And if you think for a minute that I can't recognize you from the air, I'm going to tell you right now, you're dead wrong. I can pick you out of a crowd with that camera system. When I left, it was going to 1080p. So don't think that I can't find you and positively identify you from 6 miles away, because I will. I'm going to start reading the name on your shirt.
Wow.
If we got good atmospherics, because atmospherics play, anybody tries to take a picture from a long way away, this is a camera system. So atmospherics, heat, cold, etc., all affect that. But on a great day where there's nothing crazy going on, I can zoom in on your face and positively identify you. So, and if I can't do it in day TV, which is basically color TV like this, I can flip to IR and I can see through dust, sometimes fog. You can't run from me at night. I know that I got low light capability. I can look at you with night vision and tell if you're looking at a cell phone screen, because it'll light your face up. It's a very, very, very capable aircraft. Very capable, and it gets better by the day. I literally am not kidding you. Every week we were getting briefed on a new item that we had to learn, a new capability that the aircraft could do, a new capability that was on its way. We're going to be armed with this software. They're going to load it on the ground control stations on the aircraft. We're going to be able to do X, Y, and Z. You're going to be able to do, they call it mid-wave IR, short-wave IR. It's a toy box out there for the UAV crowd. And the reason why, and I mentioned the ground force commanders, the reason why the ground force commanders look at this, they call it predator porn for a reason, because the first airplane to do this was the MQ-1 Predator. They call it pred porn for a reason, because a ground force commander wants information and he wants visuals all the time. They all want it, no matter what they're doing. If you walk into a general's office and you need a strike order signed, he's going to ask you for information. He's going to ask you for a mountain of information, because no 4-star, 3-star, 2-star, whatever is going to sign off on somebody's death warrant if that's what it's going to take without all the information. It's not going to happen. So what can I do? I can sit over a target for more than 20 hours recording everything that you do for 20 straight hours. And not only can I record it, I can pipe it to your desktop. I can put it on that general's laptop in his office and let him watch it. I can exploit it at at a giant intel squadron somewhere, and they can blow it up on a screen the size of a wall and look at you playing around with your PKM that you're about to walk up to a gate and start firing into. I can watch you load all of the prep work for a vehicle-borne IED, and then as you drive that IED towards the base, I can strike you and stop it a mile from the base where nobody gets hurt. So that's why it's so important. That's why the prevalence of this, and that's why the program went from a little predator with one missile and couldn't do much to we're going to grow this program, and the MQ-9 is the size of an A-10, and it can carry 2 500-pound bombs and 4 Hellfire missiles and still be above you for 20 hours plus. It's probably longer than that now because they extended the wings and made it more fuel efficient. So it could be 40 hours that you could just sit around and buzz around someone's head, and they can't run. They can't hide. I can see you in the dark. I can see you in the light. They're coming out with multispectral analysis cameras where I can see if you have been playing with bomb material. I can see infrared. I can see heat. I can see cold. It doesn't matter. So that's why it's so important for a ground force commander to have that platform. Special Forces uses it. We were a JSOC unit at one point where I was stationed. So I need to kind of reverse this and ask you a question. In the Marine Corps, did you ever have to deal with airstrikes or calling in for air support or artillery?
I was a lance corporal in the infantry in my deployments, so my role never required me to interface with air assets. That being said, I have seen helicopters and a gunship doing their thing.
Did you hear the JTAC actually call it in?
Maybe once, but they keep the us pretty focused on what we were doing on the ground. So we did a lot of squad based operations and didn't have a JTAC with us in most of those.
When a JTAC calls it in, he calls it a 9-line, and that 9-line is going to be received. If he's under fire, most likely it's going to be excited. It's going to be choppy. It's going to be a lot of rapid fire. It's going to be very quick. A lot of times when you're dealing with a JSOC JTAC, they're in an operations center somewhere calling your bomb strike in, and they call you up. They'll be like, "Hey, this is Saber 4-4. We're going to go ahead and strike this asset. Why don't you guys set up for 9-line Bravo, and we're going to go blah blah blah." And it's just like you're doing a bank merger, or you're paying for something online, or you're ordering from the Sears catalog, or you get the excited guy that's under fire and he's just screaming into the radio. So if people don't understand, like if I'm doing Overwatch for a convoy, or I'm doing Overwatch for a raid, because we've done Overwatch for Navy SEAL raids. My only job in the world is to make sure that the Navy SEAL that runs into the house is good to go. I don't care about anything else. I'm doing Overwatch. I am protecting him. I am making sure I have 360-degree coverage. If there's vehicles approaching, if there's people on foot, I need to let them know on the ground. The pilot's talking to them. So that's what's so important about that job. I have absolute information superiority when I'm sitting over the top of a target because I can see everything. Now, I can't see through buildings yet. I'm sure that's coming. But I can see everything around the building. And if I'm close enough, if I get the right look angle, I can look through a window. That's still possible. So the realistic thing is people say, "Oh, you're just playing a video game. You're so detached from the battlefield. You're not even really there. Why should we even care that you're there?" And I'm going to counter that argument with, we have this thing in the MQ-9 or the UAV community. It's called the unblinking eye. And if you're important enough to get an unblinking eye, which is basically there's at least 1 or 2 assets over top of you watching everything you're doing, and we never lose sight of you. If you're in the house, we watch the house till you walk out. And then we follow you wherever you go, and then we follow you back to the house until you leave again. And we never lose sight of you. We never, ever, ever lose sight of you. If you're that important, I'm going to know how many kids you have, how many wives you have, where you go, when you go to the bathroom, most likely I'm going to end up watching you go to the bathroom, because the Afghans and a lot of people in the Middle East, they just walk outside their house and go to the bathroom, and in broad daylight, they don't. There's not like a shame thing to it. So I know your life. I know your kids. I know how many wives you have. Most likely, I know what your wives' names are. I know where you go, who you interact with. I know who you call on your cell phone. I know who you text. I can see it as you're talking. It's read out in text next to me. So I know everything about your life. Now, if you put that in the context of the average American life, imagine your house in a neighborhood with your privacy fence, and that's your Middle Eastern compounder, your version of that. And I've been watching you for 3 weeks. I've been watching you go in and out. Logan and his wife and his kid. And I know his dad showed up, and I know his mom showed up, and his sister came over with her kids. And I've been watching you this whole time. And now you've walked far enough away. You're in green terrain, and I can put a missile inside of your face. Do you think I'm going to see that as a target or a person? It's not disconnected. I know more about you than you knew about who you were shooting at in person, because I've watched you longer and I understand my target. I know your motivations. I know your connections. I know why you're doing it. So, and I know who you're going to go do it to. So there's more of a connection there, and there's more of a connection to the battlefield, because I have the information superiority, and I'm sitting there, and the pilot's going to pull the trigger and the missile's going to come off the airplane, and I've got to guide it in to that person or a car or a motorcycle. It's a very personal job. And I think people lose the fact that I'm sitting in Nevada and the airplane's over Syria or Iraq or wherever it's at, and it's all being done via satellite. They think that I'm not connected. I'm far more connected. If you were shooting in the general direction of Al Qaeda or ISIS or whoever in Afghanistan, did you know their names? No. They're shooting at you and you're shooting back. You're protecting a base. You're going out on a patrol. You're kicking in doors to find information, and you're looking for this person or that person. You may or may not find them. The thing is, in our world, is we always know where our guy's at, and we always get our man, because we have the information and we have the knowledge, and we have people. We'll assign hard crews to it. We'll assign 6 crews to a mission where you get the unblinking eye. And those 6 crews, pilots and sensor operators, will swap in and out on that. And that's all they'll do until it's done. Until he's either picked up by a ground force unit, killed in another operation, blows himself up because he's not real good with explosives, or we get him. And so I want people to understand that it's not a disconnection. It's not I'm just some mindless killer. And it's not Skynet out there blowing people up with facial recognition either. There's a lot of sci-fi aspects to it. We do have a system called Skynet that we use for aerial deconfliction. That's where we assign altitudes in our mission areas with. That's nerd jokes. That's what happens in our world. It's mostly led by nerds, but that's all right. But it's not faceless. It's not meaningless. The people that are doing this, I have the faces of the people that I was involved with striking. I can still see them. I don't weep for them. I don't cry about them, but it's still with me. I carry that with me. And I want people to understand that it's not just a game, and we don't think of it as a game. So, but I'll
Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of my biggest sticking points when people, oh, you worked on the UAV program? How'd you enjoy playing Xbox? It was all right. It wasn't quite Xbox, but it was a good job. It was meaningful. I did meaningful things. I protected people. It was it turned into what it was. So.
There's things that I'm curious about to unpack that are offshoots from this main topic. Right? There's more that we could continue uncovering if we just push forward. You talked about the sci-fi thing, and although there's sci-fi aspects to it, it is very personal. And I think you make a great point with the information superiority and how a UAV sensors operator is sitting with personal details, expansive amounts of personal information for a target for a long time. And you contrast that with a village raid. It's like we're showing up and we're moving through buildings. We're flexi cuffing dudes. We're putting the dark goggles on them, putting them in the trucks, and it's done.
Yeah.
A lot of on the for Marine infantry, I'd imagine it's similar for Army infantry, enlisted dudes on the ground. We're briefed up a little bit before we go, and we're given the squad leaders and the team leaders are given a lot of the more detailed information. The lieutenants and everyone else above that have tons more information, but at a certain point, when you're a junior enlisted dude, it's like get on the helicopter, get on the truck. There's our building. Let's go.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of it's not very personal at all.
Yeah.
So to have that information, I can imagine the the mental buildup is that's intense. I really appreciate you sharing that. That perspective
Well,
is
and
great to
even though
have.
I'm sitting in a zero or like a 1G environment. I don't have any real atmospheric problems. I don't have, every once in a while the GCS does get cold because it's nothing but racks and racks of computers in there. They got to keep it at like 55 degrees. Your adrenaline pumps, you start sweating. I remember the first time I had to strike someone, they called us up and it was 4 a.m, called us up and said, "Hey, set strike posture. We're striking this guy." And my hands started to shake. I started to sweat and it was 55 degrees in the room. And you you go through that. You practice every time you fly. You have to transit, so you practice striking a target with either a bomb or a missile or both numerous times, as many times as you can, and it becomes muscle memory. So the first time that you go to strike something and your hands are shaking and you're nervous and you've never done it before and you're about to put you're about to go kinetic with a 110-pound missile at 10 G's as it leaves the airplane. It's serious. It's serious business, and it's not just a game. It's not a video game. It's nobody thinks of it that way. We don't take it any less personal than if you had to confront someone anywhere else and be in some sort of situation where you had to do them physical harm.
Very real world ramifications. I'm curious. One last question here. What sort of resilience practices are in place for sitting in front of an array of screens and that unblinking eye? I know it's not the individual operator not blinking. It's the teams, the crews transitioning through consistently with a handing off visibility over a specific target. But it does get me thinking, as someone who does work remotely, a lot of professionals in the business world work remotely. Perhaps this is a bridge into your career after the Air Force. I mean, sitting at a desk in a cold room, an array of monitors, how do you stay focused in the long periods of time where the adrenaline isn't spiking, when it's the routine observation waiting for the dude to come out of the house, as an example? How do
Right.
you stay awake and alert?
A lot of times they spell the crews quite often because we do have that problem of boredom. People, a lot of things happen in the Middle East, so a lot of our crews are stateside. So it's 4 or 5 in the morning here, and the airplane's flying around at noon or whatever, whatever the daytime is there. Everything happens in the daytime, right? Well, so we'll do 2 to 4 hour stints in the seat, and we'll get out and you go do whatever you're going to do, bathroom breaks, whatever, dinner, eat. You still have to eat, even if it's 3 o'clock in the morning. And then, make sure everyone's taken care of, try to keep people awake. A lot of times there is a lot of boredom. There's a lot of talk between the crews. I can talk. We had 5 GCSs, ground control stations, where I could pipe into another GCS, start talking to them if I needed to. or we'd have them up because we were the same two assets in our building on a specific target for an unblinking eye. So I could talk to that sensor operator. I could just talk to them, just like I'm talking to you. I could have it on hot mic and we could just have a conversation, discuss all the parameters, discuss all of the target deck, look at, hey, I'm looking at this angle. What do you see on yours? Whatever it is, but a lot of times we're just sitting there talking about our kids, or we're talking about our wives or our life, or I got to mow the lawn today when I go home. You don't have a choice, because if you don't do something, you're just going to be sitting there doing this, sleeping, and I, that happens. So
You're reminding me of very similar to standing post.
exactly, it's not nearly as hateful as that, but it's a similar. How do I shake off the boredom? Because looking at somebody's house for 8 straight hours, I've done it, and it is the worst. At Christmas time, you got, the lower enlisted, hey, why don't you guys go home for Christmas, spend time with your families, whatever. Well, when you send everybody home on leave for Christmas, the schedule gets real tight with bodies in the seat. It's 24/7, 365. We don't stop flying. So upper enlisted people, our families are there. I would just volunteer to go in for 8 hours on Christmas Day, and I would sit in the seat for 8 straight hours on Christmas Day, and it can be awful. Then I go home, and I will give you this too. This is the other part of it that people don't realize. So the first strike I had my son was born on June 14th of 2014. 30 days to the day, July 14th, I struck my first target. I lived about 10 minutes from the base. I struck my target. I got out of the seat, did we have to do a report on it that gets sent up and reviewed. Within 2 hours from me striking the first target, which was 3 people, I had a 1-month-old in my arms, feeding him a bottle because my wife hadn't slept since 3:00 that morning because he was up being fussy. And I had to go from striking 3 human beings with a missile to holding a 1-month-old and somehow making a transition in 10 minutes on my drive home. So that's another thing people don't understand. Like we do some pretty distasteful things in the name of God and country, if you will. And there's not always a great transition between, hey, I just did this horrible thing, and here's a baby. You've got to be able to transition. You got to be able to switch it off, because if you don't, it like anything else. We've heard of veterans coming home with PTSD issues, and their families are suffering because they're having issues, and then which causes abuse and just alcohol, drugs, fill in the void, trying to numb the pain. So you have to be able to. So we have chaplains with TSSCI read-ins where they can come in and help us. They're in our building. We have psychologists that have a TSSCI read-in that comes in to help us with that. Like, how do you transition from congratulations, you just got your first strike out of the way, to here's a baby that's screaming and won't stop? I don't know what's more torture than a baby screaming, but
that's a serious mental. That's like mental acrobatics of the highest kind. That's intense.
That's every day for more than 5,000 people in the Air Force alone. Marine Corps has it. The Army has it. The Navy's getting it. So if you think about that, the Navy's probably not as bad if you're doing shipboard operations. The Marine Corps probably not as bad if you're doing shipboard operations. But if you're sitting at home station in a ground control station and you had an active night where you cleaned the wings and then handed it off to the next crew, and you walked away with your brain is full, that you are mentally exhausted by the time you do 4 hours of constant activity in that time. And you're going to go home to, you could be going home to traffic. You could be going home to screaming kids or normal family life. And you just work shift work, and now you still have to sleep, and the kids are screaming. And I mean, you got a young child, you know how that is. I mean, it's sometimes they don't want to sleep, and you didn't get to sleep, and then nobody sleeps, and you're watching train videos on YouTube at 3:00 in the morning with your 2-year-old. Ask me how I know.
Direct experience.
direct experience. So these are real challenges that people have. So
I really appreciate you taking us down that journey, your journey from childhood through the Air Force. We're getting to a place now that's bridging into the civilian life, post-military. And I know part of my responsibility in this discussion is a timekeeper and recognizing where we're going to plant the flag.
sure.
Before we jumped on the line, we were saying we anticipated there's going to be a place for us to plant the flag, and or in order for us to pick it up in part two. And I wonder how you feel about this being that place, that bridge between transitioning out of the military in your career, but also I love how you're bringing in the day-to-day transition for so many service members that are in these programs, but also more of the official, so to speak, EAS or separation from the military and what that looked like for you directly. And if that's the place we plant the flag to pick up on our follow-on discussion.
Yeah, that'd be great. That's perfect.
Right on. Wow, you are a wealth of insight, Mathew. Really appreciate you coming on the podcast and sharing this with me today.
Yeah, well, I wanted my main goal with this when we spoke the first time, I wanted to make sure that people realize that they're not the only ones suffering. I think that's one of the biggest misconceptions of veterans or people who are struggling with separating from the military, that anxiety of I don't know what's coming next. Am I going to have a job? I have to provide for myself or my family. I want to go to school, whatever it is, whatever your goal is after the military or whatever your struggle is, you're not the only one that struggles. You're not the only one that has struggled, and you're not the only one that's going to struggle. And I think that people need to be able to realize that the anxiety or that fear of the unknown. I'll say a couple of things about that before we close out today, just so people can understand it. There's a gentleman I listened to. He talked about being his selection into Delta Force. His first name's John. They called him the Sheriff of Baghdad. I'm not sure. I don't remember his last name, but he was in the Delta Force. He was a sergeant major, and he was a big deal in Delta Force and Special Forces. And he talked about his time in going through that selection process. He just said, or somebody told him, I don't remember what it was. He said to himself, or someone told him, "There's nothing that is going to go on today that I can't get through. Nothing's going to happen today that I can't get through. Let me just worry about that today, and I'll get through that, and then tomorrow's tomorrow. Yesterday's already gone. That day's already spent. I got today. I'll get through today, and then tomorrow's tomorrow." And I'm paraphrasing that, but that's the gist of what he said. And I think people need to look at their transition from the military, whether they did 4 years or 6 or 30. It doesn't matter. Wherever you fall in line with that, you got to look at it as I'm transitioning out, and whatever I got to do, nothing I can't get through today, considering the perspective of looking back on kicking someone's front door in and dragging them out and put flexi cuffs on them and understanding what the fatal funnel is when you kick the door in. Like, you kick that door in and 762 comes flying at you. You got through that. Why is that scarier than getting out of the military? It's not. Why is the military scarier than facing gunfire? And I'll tell you why I personally suspect that it's easier to face gunfire than it is to get out of the military, because we were taught to equate gunfire to real things. You can calculate and gonculate that in your brain, and you understand what it is. You've fired guns. You know what the kick of the gun's going to be. You know what the snap of the pistol is going to be when you fire it. You know what the thump of the Mark 19 is going to do. The 50, it's going to be ear shattering. You can equate machine gun fire to real things. It can be a real problem that you can solve by returning other machine gun fire. When you were transitioning out of the military, you were fighting an invisible enemy, and that invisible enemy is time and anxiety. And there's no physical way to manifest beating that. The only thing you can do is get up and say, there's nothing that's going to happen today that I can't get through. And the second thing I'll say is you got to align your perspective to what's really happening. And I spoke about that in our first meeting. You got to really realize what you bring to the table. And I think that the people need to understand that they are more capable than they think they are. They have more going on for them than they realize. And one of the things they can do is either get a resume made for you or do your resume yourself. And there's a million resources out there that you can look at YouTube. You can look at, you can download formats, whatever. Put all of you in a resume on paper and then read it. Don't just say, okay, I got that, and I got that. There's my resume. No. Read it. Read your resume and understand this is you professionally. This is what you bring to the table. You are encapsulating everything that you are professionally. Don't worry about the personal part. Don't worry about, well, what if I let my family down? No. Don't worry about that right now. Worry about putting you on paper as a professional and then having the perspective to realize, holy shit, I bring a lot to the table. That's it. And I'll leave you with a third thing because we got about a minute to go before we have to put a stake in this. There's a lot of people with PTSD. There's a lot of guys that come out and they have a big hole right here in the middle of them. And they don't know how to fill it because we've been filling it for them. We've been spoon feeding them accomplishment, accolades, leadership. We made them important. We gave them a purpose. And we told them how they're going to succeed. A lot of guys, I could solve a lot of guys' problems by putting a gun in their hand, strapping body armor on them, putting them in a helmet, and standing them outside of a doorway and say, no one comes in here, die trying. And they would fix their PTSD immediately. Even if they're drinking and they're womanizing and they're out there partying and they're trying to fill that big hole. All I got to do is put 40 pounds of shit on them and hand them a loaded rifle and say, no one comes through that door. That's it. And all of a sudden, they don't want to drink. They'll go home and they'll sleep on purpose. They'll be rested. They'll have a purpose. So pay attention and realign your perspective to your reality. And pay attention to who you are on paper and what you would bring to a company or your own business and what you bring to your family and what you're capable of. You are more than the sum of what was put on your sleeve or put on your collar in the military. And we can put a flag in it right there. And we'll talk about that on the next one if you'll have me back.
Absolutely. And finding a new purpose.
Yes. I am going to tell you for 100% fact, finding your new purpose, you have the permission to do that. You're the captain now. Now it's time to make that decision. For sure.
Words of wisdom. I'm stoked to reconnect to pick this up.
Okay.
Mathew, thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. I'll be happy to come back.
Right on, man.